had this exhibition, Women of the Resistance Activism, earlier in the year here in the Arts Centre. And so while I was researching activism in general, I came across Sojourner Truth, who had done a speech in 1851 at the Women's Convention in Akron. And the speech is known as Ain't I a Woman? And she repeats that question several times throughout her speech. And I was just struck by how fresh and modern and delightfully ironic the speech was. And I was really interested in exploring that more and maybe sharing that exploration with other women. And so I was able to invite 6 other artists. Well, I invited more, but 6 were able to take up the call to reflect on that. And it's been a really interesting opportunity. Funnily enough, a lot of these women, many of which are similar ages, sort of 30, 40-ish, didn't know each other, didn't know their practice. So even for that alone, it was a very useful exercise before we even have, the exhibition up. And it's not really an exhibition, it's more a series of installation and responses and experiments around the speech and, what it might be saying to us today. For me personally as well, there's this whole dimension of, the women elsewhere in the world, the voiceless women who are basically still hugely exploited. And I suppose my interest as a textile artist is to explore that. So I'll be bringing in my own braids, which is what I do, and exploring, where does that come from and where does it go? And the whole idea also of cheap fashion and waste is very pertinent.
The last year or two I've been looking specifically at beauty in the natural body and feminine beauty, mainly because of today's world with mass media, particularly social media, and the fact that we're saturated with imagery everywhere, between Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram and so on, and the pressures that especially the younger females of today are put under to use products or what's hot and what's not, and just this is the attitude that they feel that they have to apply to themselves, we'll say, to fit in society. Despite the fact that my work's being that little bit more static, I wasn't doing a performance piece to portray the entire woman, but the works, although they were all very different, I feel they've sat together really well.
This work shown here as part of Ain't I a Woman is quiet and tentative, and you sense it's part of a wider community of work. You can imagine the large roll of canvas from which this small piece came. And as ridiculous as it sounds, I spent so much time wondering and worrying how to display this work. I decided to simply drape it over some tools and props from my studio, not like a precious shroud, but rather as something that appears active, useful, something with agency. I dedicate this piece to all the beautiful and empowering women I know, and it's called For Mary, with love and thanks.
I read the speech as both the original inspiration, and I was kind of thinking about the legacy that she's left behind, and kind of trying to reflect on my own journey as a woman, and maybe some of the restrictions or limitations that I felt.
Then that little man in black says, women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, well then these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they've asked him to do it. And the men better let him. Obliged to you for hearing me today. today. And now, Sojourner, ain't got nothing more to say. When Theresia asked me to be involved with this, I had a look at the speech, and I suppose it was delivered in 1851 in Ohio at a women's convention, and I suppose given that time frame, I just felt it was an incredibly brave speech for any woman, but particularly a woman of colour, to deliver. And then I kind of tried to look at the world that we live in today and to try and find some connection, because I think whenever anybody makes a speech that's brave enough, there are ripples of inspiration, because as human beings we kind of connect with it in some way.
Restrain is one of a series of artworks concerned with the processes of the ageing body and how these impact on the physical, emotional and social life of the person. I used incontinence pads and shaped them like a dress over a tailor's dummy to draw attention to the hidden problem of urinary incontinence. Many women after pregnancy and delivery refrain from seeking medical advice. They believe that this is an inevitable part of normal ageing, and consequently they believe that nothing can be done about it. And SUIs often have a profoundly negative impact on the well-being of women's self-perception, their self-confidence and their social and sexual relationships.
So seeing the witch hunts as a way of reordering society and forcing women into a domestic role through very violent means by demonising their sexuality, and also kind of a church state control of women's reproductive capacities, so outlawing things like contraception and abortion. The research has begun there, and I've kind of been conceptualising it as also kind of that the witch hunts were also killing off women's kind of creative and intellectual capacities and kind of not allowing women to contribute those capacities to society. So I've been thinking about it as a kind of a killing of the goddess being that creative and intellectual part of women.
I love the stories of Granuaile, the warrior queen, who was actually the leader of her clan in the west in Mayo. She was never recognised because she was female. I searched and looked for poems or songs about her, and I said, well, there aren't any, so I'll write one. And then I have a couple of my own songs as well, which are one about my mother and one about women in general. Warrior, sailor, pirate, queen, sailing on the broad back deep, the nurse of our rebellion soul, protected by her rock-bound shore. Mother, wife and widow twice, married for a maiden's price, the rising winds to fill her sails, on and through the frothing waves. This woman who from storm was born, Grania set sail on the western shore. No man's woman is warrior.
It's been very refreshing to, just listening to each other, and then this idea of cohabitating in the same space is something that I quite like, that, and it's quite fluid, and I suppose it's quite a feminine thing as well, this fluidity. And then learning from each other and collaborating. Myself and Brigid Teehan will be doing a piece together, which is sort of a bit of a tongue-in-cheek look at, the Barbie world and the feminist world and how that clashes. But I suppose it shows how we are kind of, as practitioners, we work in your own field. It's the sort of multidisciplinarity of practice, which is something that I'm really interested in, is not that widely practiced locally, and maybe that can change by actually coming together more.
If